Elena Rossi stood on an auction block in a basement beneath Milan, her wrists bound, her father's debt written across her skin like a brand. Around her, men in tailored suits appraised her with the cold eyes of collectors examining fine art. She was no longer a daughter, no longer a student. She was inventory. And when Dominic Varelli entered the room, every voice fell silent. He didn't bid. He declared. And with a single word, he owned her. If you're ready to see how far love can reach into the darkness, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Elena Rossi had always believed that literature could save a person, that between the pages of Dante and Pavese, there existed a kind of sanctuary where the world's cruelty couldn't reach. She spent her evenings in the university library in Milan, translating poetry, writing essays on tragedy and redemption, living inside the safety of metaphor. She never imagined she would become the tragedy herself. It started with a phone call she wasn't supposed to hear. Her father, Marco Rossi, had always been a man of modest means, a bookkeeper for a small import company, a man who wore the same 3 shirts in rotation and took his coffee black to save money. He was careful, cautious. Or so Elena had thought. But on a rainy Tuesday in October, she came home early from class and heard his voice through the thin walls of their apartment. It was shaking. "I don't have it," he said. "Please, I need more time." Elena paused in the hallway, her bag still slung over her shoulder, water dripping from her coat onto the tile. "I know what I signed," her father continued, his voice breaking. "I know what it means, but she's my daughter. She has nothing to do with this." Elena's heart turned to ice. She pushed open the door. Her father sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, the phone pressed to his ear. When he saw her, his face went white. "I'll call you back," he whispered and ended the call. "Papa?" Elena said slowly. "What's going on?" He didn't answer. He just stared at her with the hollow eyes of a man who had already lost everything. The truth came out in pieces over the next 2 days. Marco Rossi had borrowed money. A lot of money. Not from a bank. Banks didn't lend to men like him, but from a private investor. A man with connections. A man whose name people didn't say out loud. The investment was supposed to save the company. It was supposed to be a sure thing. But the deal fell through, the company collapsed, and the debt remained. 200,000 euros. With interest, it had ballooned to over 500,000. "I thought I could fix it," her father said, his voice hoarse. They sat across from each other at the same kitchen table where Elena had done her homework as a child. "I thought I had time." "How much time do you have?" Elena asked. He looked at her, and she saw the answer in his silence. "None," she whispered. "They're coming tomorrow." Yeah, Elena didn't sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how her entire life could collapse in a single conversation. She thought about running. She thought about calling the police. But her father had explained in a voice drained of all hope that men like this didn't fear the law. They were the law in the places that mattered. "What will they do?" she had asked. Her father couldn't answer. But Elena had read enough tragedies to know how these stories ended. Well, they came at dawn. 3 men in black coats, no badges, no warrant. They didn't knock. They walked in as if they owned the place. Perhaps they did. One of them, a man with silver hair and a scar along his jaw, looked at Elena's father with the kind of pity usually reserved for animals about to be put down. "Marco," he said quietly, "you know why we're here." Her father nodded. He didn't even try to argue. The man turned to Elena. His gaze moved over her slowly, appraising. She felt her skin crawl. "This is your daughter?" "Yes." "How old?" 22. The man nodded as if confirming a detail in a ledger. Then he looked back at her father. "The debt is clear. You signed the contract. You understood the terms." "I'll pay," her father said desperately. "I just need—" "You had time. You spent it poorly." The man's voice was calm, almost gentle. "The collateral clause is now in effect." Elena's breath caught. "What does that mean?" The man looked at her. "It means you're coming with us." She fought. Of course she fought, but there were 3 of them, and they moved with the efficiency of men who had done this before. One held her father back while he screamed her name. Another grabbed her arms and forced them behind her back. The third opened the door. "Please!" her father shouted, his voice breaking. "Take me! Take me instead!" The silver-haired man paused at the threshold. He looked back with something that might have been sympathy. "You're not worth anything, Marco," he said quietly. "She is." And then they took her. The car was black, expensive, and silent. Elena sat in the back seat, her wrists zip-tied in front of her, her mind spinning. She thought about screaming, thought about throwing herself out of the moving vehicle, but survival instinct kept her frozen. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. The driver didn't answer. The man beside her, the one with the scar, glanced at her briefly. "Somewhere you'll be appraised." Appraised? The word tasted like acid. "You're an asset now. Assets get evaluated before sale." Elena's stomach turned. "You're going to sell me?" The man didn't answer. He didn't need to. They drove for over an hour, leaving Milan behind, winding through countryside roads until they reached a villa, hidden behind high stone walls. It looked like something out of a Renaissance painting, beautiful, old, suffocating. Inside, the air smelled like expensive cologne and old money. Elena was led down a marble hallway into a room where two women waited. They didn't introduce themselves. They simply gestured for her to undress. "No?" Elena said. "It's not optional," one of them replied. "I said no." The scarred man appeared in the doorway. "You can cooperate, or we can make you cooperate. Your choice." Elena's hands trembled as she unbuttoned her coat. They measured her, photographed her, wrote notes on clipboards as if she were livestock. When it was over, they gave her a dress, simple, black, elegant, and told her to put it on. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," the woman said, "you wait for the auction." No. The auction was held in a basement. Elena had imagined something grotesque, a warehouse, a cage, chains. But this was worse because it was beautiful. The room was dimly lit, lined with velvet chairs, art on the walls. Classical music played softly in the background. There were other girls, 6 of them, all young, all terrified. They stood in a line along the far wall, and men in tailored suits walked past them, examining, whispering, making notes. Elena felt her mind fracture. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But then the auctioneer stepped forward, a man in his 50s with a pleasant smile and a voice like warm honey. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said. "Thank you for joining us. We have a fine selection tonight. Let's begin." One by one, the girls were brought forward. The auctioneer described them like wine. Age, background, education, skills. The men bid with raised fingers, casual nods, no emotion, just transaction. When the girl beside Elena sold for 70,000 euros, Elena's knees nearly gave out. Then it was her turn. The auctioneer smiled. "Our next item is particularly special. 22 years old, university educated, literature major, fluent in Italian, English, and French. Well-read, well-mannered, a rare combination of beauty and intellect." The men leaned forward. "We'll start the bidding at 50,000. A hand went up. 60. Another hand. 75. Elena's vision blurred. She couldn't breathe. 100,000. The room went quiet, and then the door at the back of the room opened. As Dominic Varelli didn't walk into a room. He claimed it. He was older than the others. Mid-40s, maybe. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin, and his eyes, pale gray, sharp as cut glass, swept the room with the calm authority of a man who had never once been told no. The auctioneer straightened. "Mr. Varelli, we weren't expecting—" "I'm here now," Dominic said. His voice was low, quiet, but it carried. He walked forward, his gaze moving past the other men, past the auctioneer, and landing on Elena. She couldn't look away. His expression didn't change. He simply looked at her, into her, as if reading something written in a language only he understood. Then he spoke. 500,000. The room went silent. The auctioneer blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You heard me. Mr. Varelli, the current bid is only—" "I'm not bidding," Dominic said quietly. "I'm buying." He turned to face the room, and Elena saw it, the shift, the way every man in that basement suddenly remembered who held the real power. Does anyone want to challenge me? Dominic asked. No one moved. He turned back to the auctioneer. Then we're done here. Elena's legs gave out. Two men caught her before she hit the floor, but she barely noticed. Her mind was spinning, fragmenting, trying to process what had just happened. She'd been sold, not to the highest bidder, to a man who didn't need to bid at all. Dominic approached her slowly. He didn't touch her. He simply looked down at her with those pale, unreadable eyes. What's your name? He asked. She couldn't answer. Your name, he repeated, softer this time. Elena, she whispered. He nodded as if committing it to memory. Then he looked at the men holding her. Let her go. They released her immediately. Dominic extended a hand. Can you walk? Elena stared at his hand like it was a weapon. I'm not going to hurt you, he said quietly, but we're leaving, now. She didn't take his hand, but she stood, and she followed him out of that basement into a world she no longer recognized. The car waiting outside was even more expensive than the one that had brought her here. Dominic opened the door himself and gestured for her to get in. Elena hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to run. But where would she go? Back to her father who had sold her to pay his debts? To the police who wouldn't believe her? To a world that had already made it clear she was worth nothing more than a price tag? She got in the car. Dominic slid in beside her, and the driver pulled away without a word. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Elena stared out the window, watching Milan disappear behind them, replaced by dark countryside roads that seemed to stretch on forever. Finally, she found her voice. Where are you taking me? Home, Dominic said. I don't have a home anymore. He glanced at her, and for just a moment, something almost human flickered across his face. You do now. Oh, they drove for hours. Elena must have dozed off at some point, because when she opened her eyes again, the landscape had changed. They were no longer in the countryside. They were on a coastal road, the sea stretching out black and endless to the right, cliffs rising to the left. And ahead, perched on a promontory overlooking the water, was a fortress. It was old, stone walls, iron gates, towers that looked like they had stood for centuries. But it was also alive. Lights glowed in the windows. Guards stood at the entrance. This wasn't a ruin. It was a stronghold. The car passed through the gates, and Elena's heart sank. She had left one prison only to enter another. Inside, the fortress was a contradiction. The exterior was medieval, brutal, designed to keep the world out. But the interior was modern, elegant, marble floors, high ceilings, art that probably cost more than her father's debt. It was a place built by someone who understood power, who wielded it without apology. Dominic led her through the halls without speaking. Servants moved past them, their eyes downcast, their movements practiced. No one looked at her. No one asked questions. He stopped in front of a heavy wooden door and pushed it open. This is your room, he said. Elena stepped inside. It was larger than her entire apartment in Milan. A four-poster bed dominated the space, dressed in white linens. A fireplace crackled softly in the corner. French doors opened onto a balcony overlooking the sea. It was beautiful. It was a cage. You'll have everything you need, Dominic continued. Clothes, books, anything you want, just ask. Elena turned to face him. Except my freedom. His expression didn't change. You're not a prisoner. Then I can leave? He met her gaze. No? Then I'm a prisoner. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been regret, but it was gone before she could name it. You're my wife, he said quietly. Elena's breath caught. What? The paperwork was completed an hour ago. We're married. You can't... Her voice broke. You can't just... I can, Dominic said. And I did. He stepped back, his hand on the door. Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning. Wait. But the door closed and she heard the lock turn. Elena stood alone in her gilded cage, the sound of the sea crashing against the rocks below, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she let herself cry. She didn't sleep. How could she? Elena paced the room like a caged animal, testing the doors, the windows, looking for any way out. But the balcony overlooked a sheer drop to the sea and the door was locked from the outside. She was trapped. She sank onto the bed, her mind racing. Married, to a man she'd never met, a man who had bought her like property. Who was Dominic Varelli? She thought back to the auction, the way every man in that room had deferred to him, the way the auctioneer had straightened when he entered, the way no one had dared challenge him. This wasn't just wealth. This was power, the kind of power that didn't ask permission, the kind that took. Morning came too soon. Elena woke to find a tray of food waiting on the table by the window. Fresh bread, fruit, coffee. She ignored it. A soft knock sounded at the door, and a woman entered. She was older, maybe 60, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Good morning, signora," she said in Italian. "I'm Lucia. I'll be looking after you." "I don't need looking after," Elena said. Lucia smiled sadly. Nevertheless, she moved to the wardrobe and began laying out clothes. "Mr. Varelli has asked that you join him for breakfast. I'll help you dress." "I can dress myself." "Of course." Lucia stepped back. "But he doesn't like to be kept waiting." Elena wanted to refuse, wanted to stay locked in this room out of spite, but she also knew that wouldn't change anything. So she dressed, and she went to meet her husband. Dominic was waiting in a sunlit dining room overlooking the sea. He sat at the head of a long table, reading a newspaper, a cup of espresso at his elbow. He didn't look up when she entered. "Sit," he said. Elena remained standing. "I want to go home." "You are home." "This isn't my home. You don't own me." Now he looked up. His pale eyes met hers, and she saw no anger there, just certainty. "Actually," he said quietly, "I do." Elena's hands clenched into fists. "I'm not property. In the eyes of the law, you're my wife. In the eyes of the world that matters, you belong to me." He set down his newspaper. "Sit down, Elena." "No," he sighed. "I'm trying to be civil." "Civil?" She laughed, the sound bitter. "You bought me at an auction. You locked me in a room. You married me without my consent. And now you want me to sit down and have breakfast like this is normal?" Dominic stood. He moved around the table slowly, and Elena fought the urge to step back. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the silver in his hair, the way his gaze seemed to see straight through her. "I understand that you're angry," he said. "I understand that you're frightened, but let me make something very clear." He stepped closer. "You were sold. Whether I bought you or someone else did, that was going to happen. Your father's debt made sure of that." His voice was calm, almost gentle. "But the men in that room, they would have broken you, used you, destroyed you, and when they were done, they would have thrown you away." Elena's throat tightened. "I won't do that," Dominic continued. "You're safe here. You're protected, and as long as you're my wife, no one will touch you." "And what do you want in return?" she whispered. His gaze held hers. "I haven't decided yet." Then he stepped back, returning to his seat. "Now sit down," he said, "and eat." This time, Elena sat. The days blurred together. Elena was given freedom within the fortress. She could walk the halls, explore the gardens, sit by the sea. But the gates remained locked. Guards stood at every exit. And Dominic's presence was everywhere, even when he wasn't in the room. She saw him at meals. He was polite, distant, asking her about her day as if they were strangers sharing a table. He didn't touch her, didn't demand anything. But his eyes followed her, always watching, always aware. It unsettled her, because it would have been easier if he were cruel, easier if he fit the monster she wanted him to be. But Dominic Varelli was something far more dangerous. He was patient. One evening, Elena found a library. It was tucked away in one of the old towers. 3 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books in a dozen languages. She stood in the doorway, breathless, feeling something almost like hope. "You found it." She turned. Dominic stood behind her, hands in his pockets, watching her with that same unreadable expression. "It's yours," he said, "if you want it." Elena looked back at the shelves. "Why do you have all these books if you're never here?" "I'm here more than you think." She ran her fingers along the spines. Dante, Pavese, Calvino. Authors she'd studied, loved, lived inside. "Did you choose these?" she asked. "Some of them." She pulled out a worn copy of The Divine Comedy and opened it. The margins were filled with notes in a strong, slanted hand. "You read Dante?" she asked, surprised. Dominic stepped into the room. "I've spent enough time in hell to appreciate a guided tour." Despite herself, Elena almost smiled. "Keep it," he said. "Keep all of them. This is your space now." He turned to leave, and Elena found herself speaking before she could stop. "Why did you buy me?" Dominic paused in the doorway. For a long moment he didn't answer, then quietly, "Because I could." And he was gone. That night, Elena dreamed of the auction. She woke gasping, her heart racing, the walls of her beautiful prison closing in. She stumbled onto the balcony, gulping in sea air, trying to remember how to breathe. And when she looked down, she saw him. Dominic stood on the rocks below, alone, staring out at the dark water. He didn't move, didn't seem to notice the cold. He just stood there, as still as the stone beneath his feet. Elena watched him, and for the first time she wondered, what kind of man builds a fortress to keep the world out? And what is he so afraid of letting in? The question haunted Elena through the following days, threading itself into every interaction, every silence, every moment she caught Dominic watching her from across a room. What was he afraid of? She began to study him the way she had once studied literature, looking for patterns, subtext, the things left unsaid. She noticed that he never raised his voice, even when giving orders, that he touched nothing carelessly, that he moved through the fortress like a man perpetually aware of every exit, every threat, every variable he couldn't control. And she noticed that he was alone. Men came to see him, dangerous men with hard eyes and expensive suits, but they never stayed long. They conducted their business in his study, behind closed doors, and left without pleasantries. Dominic had no friends, no family that she could see, just Lucia, the guards, and the vast silence of stone walls built to keep the world at bay. He was a king in a kingdom of ghosts. And Elena was the only living thing he'd allowed inside. The realization didn't comfort her. If anything, it made her more uneasy, because men who built walls that high usually had something to hide, or something to protect. She couldn't decide which possibility frightened her more. 3 weeks into her captivity, Elena made her first real attempt at defiance. She'd been walking the gardens in the late afternoon, trying to lose herself in the scent of jasmine and the sound of the sea, when she noticed something. One of the side gates, usually locked, stood slightly ajar. A gardener must have forgotten to secure it after bringing in supplies. Elena's heart began to race. She glanced around. No guards in sight. The sun was setting, shadows lengthening across the grounds. If she moved quickly, if she stayed low, she might make it to the coastal road before anyone noticed. And then what? A voice in her head asked. "Where will you go?" She pushed the thought away. Anywhere was better than here. Elena slipped through the gate. The path beyond was steep and rocky, winding down the cliffside toward the beach below. She half ran, half stumbled, her breath coming in sharp gasps, adrenaline singing through her veins. Freedom was so close she could taste it. Salt air and possibility, and the fierce joy of making her own choice, even if it led nowhere. She'd made it halfway down the path when she heard his voice. "Stop." Elena froze. Dominic stood 20 feet above her on the path, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable in the fading light. "Come back," he said quietly. "No." "Elena." "I said no." She turned to face him fully, her hands shaking. "I'm not your possession. I'm not your wife. I'm a person, and I'm leaving." "Where will you go?" The question landed like a blow, because she didn't have an answer. No money, no documents, no one to call who wouldn't send her straight back to her father, or worse. "I don't know," she admitted, "but anywhere is better than being your prisoner." Something flickered across Dominic's face. Hurt, maybe, or anger, she couldn't tell. He started down the path toward her, moving with the careful grace of a predator who didn't want to spook his prey. "Don't come any closer," Elena warned. He kept walking. "I mean it." "Or what?" He stopped a few feet away. "You'll jump? The rocks below would kill you instantly. Is that what you want?" "I want to be free." "Free to what? Go back to Milan? Back to your father, who Who sold you to save himself? His voice was still quiet, but there was steel beneath it now. You think the world out there is better than this? You think it will protect you? I think it will let me choose. Choice is an illusion, Dominic said. We're all trapped by something. Debt, fear, the past. At least here, you're safe. Safe? Elena laughed bitterly. I'm locked in a fortress with a man who bought me like livestock. That's not safety. That's just a prettier cage. For a long moment, Dominic didn't speak. He simply looked at her, and in the dying light, his eyes seemed almost sad. Come back inside, he said finally. Please. The please caught her off guard. It was the first time he'd asked rather than commanded. And if I don't, then I'll carry you back. And you'll hate me even more than you already do. But you'll be alive, and you'll be here. He stepped closer. I won't let you go, Elena. Not because I'm cruel. Because everyone else is. She wanted to argue, wanted to fight. But standing on that cliffside path, with the sea crashing below and darkness closing in, Elena realized something terrible. He was right. She had nowhere to go. No one to turn to. The world had already made it clear what she was worth. Dominic extended his hand. Please. Elena looked at his hand for a long time. Then, hating herself for it, she took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm, solid, anchor-strong. And together they walked back up the path toward the fortress that was both her prison and her only refuge. Neither of them spoke. But Dominic didn't let go of her hand until they were inside. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, replaying the scene on the cliffside, the weight of Dominic's words settling over her like stone. Choice is an illusion. Was that what he truly believed? That freedom was just another lie people told themselves? And if he believed that, what did it say about the life he'd built? She rose and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, stepping out onto the balcony. The sea stretched out black and infinite below, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. And there, on the rocks, stood Dominic. Again. Elena had noticed this habit over the past weeks, how he came here late at night, alone, staring out at the water as if searching for something he'd lost. She'd never asked about it, never acknowledged that she'd seen. But tonight something pushed her forward. She found her way down through the fortress, through corridors she'd memorized in her explorations, until she emerged onto the rocky beach. The wind whipped her hair, cold and wild, but she kept walking. Dominic didn't turn when she approached, but his shoulders tensed, awareness settling over him. You should be sleeping, he said. So should you. I don't sleep much. Elena stopped beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body despite the cold. Why? Old habit. That's not an answer. He glanced at her, something almost like amusement crossing his face. No, it's not. They stood in silence, the sea roaring against the rocks, the fortress looming behind them like a watchful giant. Can I ask you something? Elena said finally. You can ask. I may not answer. Fair enough. She pulled the shawl tighter. Why did you really buy me? Dominic was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't respond. Then, I saw you standing on that platform, and I saw myself. Elena turned to look at him. What do you mean? I was 12 when I was sold, he said quietly. Different circumstances, different price, but the same transaction. Someone who had power over my life decided I was worth more as property than as a person. And I learned very quickly that the world is divided into two kinds of people, those who are bought and those who do the buying. Elena's breath caught. What happened to you? I survived, I learned, and eventually I became the one who did the buying. He looked at her fully now, his pale eyes reflecting the starlight. When I saw you on that platform, I saw a girl who still believed the world was supposed to be fair. I saw innocence that hadn't been beaten out yet, and I thought... He stopped, jaw tightening. You thought what? I thought maybe I could keep it that way, just once, just for one person. He turned back to the sea. I was wrong. I can't give you back your freedom, but I can keep you from the men who would have taken everything else. Elena didn't know what to say. She'd expected cruelty, possessiveness, hunger, but this quiet confession, this glimpse of the boy who'd been broken and reformed into something harder, She hadn't expected this. I don't know whether to thank you or hate you for that, she whispered. You can do both, Dominic said. Most people do. They stood together on the rocks, two prisoners of different kinds. And for the first time since the auction, Elena felt the first crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. The following morning brought change. Elena woke to find Lucia laying out clothes different from the simple dresses she'd been given before. Tailored pants, a silk blouse, boots suitable for walking. Mr. Varelli asked that you join him after breakfast, Lucia said. He has something to show you. What kind of something? Lucia smiled mysteriously. You'll see. An hour later, Elena found Dominic waiting in the courtyard. He'd traded his usual dark suits for jeans and a black sweater, and something about the casual clothes made him seem younger, less untouchable. Come, he said, gesturing toward a car. Where are we going? You'll see. You know, I'm getting tired of that answer. The corner of his mouth twitched. Then stop asking questions and find out. Against her better judgment, Elena got in the car. They drove away from the fortress, winding along coastal roads that offered breathtaking views of the sea. Dominic drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the window frame, and Elena found herself studying his profile. The strong jaw, the slight crook in his nose that suggested it had been broken at least once, the way his eyes tracked everything even when he seemed relaxed. You're staring, he said without looking at her. You're my entire world right now. There's not much else to look at. Is that resentment I hear? Yes. Good. I'd be worried if you were happy. Despite herself, Elena almost smiled. They drove for another 20 minutes before Dominic pulled off onto a narrow road that led down to a small village tucked into the hillside. It was the kind of place tourists never found. Old stone houses, a tiny church, a market square where elderly women sold vegetables and fishermen mended nets. Dominic parked and got out. Come on. Elena followed him through the village, aware of the way people greeted him with respectful nods, the way they didn't quite meet his eyes. They knew who he was, what he was, and they gave him the space that dangerous men required. He led her to a small cafe overlooking the water, where a table had been set for two. Sit, he said. Elena sat, confused. What is this? Lunch. I can see that. Why are we here? Dominic settled into his chair, signaling the waiter. You said you felt trapped, that the fortress was a cage. I thought you might like to see that you're not actually locked inside it. You're free to move, to explore, as long as you don't try to run. And if I do, then I'll find you? He said it simply, without threat, just fact. But I'd rather you didn't, because I'd like to show you more than just this village. The waiter arrived with wine, bread, olives. Dominic ordered for both of them in rapid Italian, and Elena realized she was seeing a different side of him. Not the cold buyer from the auction, not the distant husband from the fortress, but something closer to an actual person. Tell me about your family, she said suddenly. Dominic's expression shuddered. No. Why not? Because they're dead, and talking about them won't bring them back. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm not. He poured wine into her glass. Tell me about your studies. What were you working on before? He paused. Before. Elena took a sip of wine, letting the warmth settle through her. I was writing my thesis on the concept of redemption in Italian literature, whether transformation is possible for characters who've committed terrible acts, whether love can change someone fundamentally, or if it just makes them better at hiding what they are. Dominic's eyes sharpened with interest. And what did you conclude? I hadn't finished, but I was starting to think that redemption isn't about erasing what you've done. It's about choosing every day not to do it again. It's active, ongoing, not a single moment of grace, but a lifetime of small, better choices. And you believe that's possible? I don't know, Elena admitted. Do you? Dominic was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. I think some of us are too far gone for redemption. I think some things, once done, can't be undone. The best we can hope for is containment, limiting the damage. That's bleak. That's realistic. Or maybe, Elena said carefully, it's just easier to believe you can't change than to do the work of changing. Something dangerous flickered in Dominic's eyes. Be careful, Elena. You're starting to sound like you care. I'm starting to sound like someone who reads too much, she corrected. Don't confuse analysis with affection. But even as she said it, she felt the lie in it. Because somewhere between the fortress and this tiny cafe, between fear and fascination, something had shifted. She was starting to see Dominic Varelli not as a monster, but as a man. And that terrified her more than anything else. Over the following weeks, Dominic began taking Elena beyond the fortress regularly. They visited villages along the coast, walked through markets, sat in cafes where the coffee was strong and the conversations were quiet. He introduced her to no one, but people seemed to know her anyway. La Moglie, they whispered, the wife. Elena hated the title, but she couldn't deny that the outings gave her something she'd been craving, the illusion of normalcy. For a few hours at a time, she could pretend she was simply a woman having coffee with her husband, rather than property bound by contract and fear. And Dominic was different outside the fortress walls. He was still controlled, still watchful, but there was a looseness to him in the open air. He told her about the region's history, pointed out landmarks, shared stories about the sea that revealed a surprising knowledge of sailing and navigation. You should have been a teacher, Elena said one afternoon, as they walked along a beach. Dominic laughed, an actual laugh, low and surprised. I don't think the world needs me teaching anyone anything. Why not? You clearly love this place. You know everything about it. Knowing and teaching are different things. Teaching requires caring whether the student learns. I'm not sure I have that capacity. You taught me about the tides yesterday. That's different. How? He stopped walking, turning to face her. The wind caught his hair, and in the afternoon light he looked younger than his years. Because you listened. Most people don't actually listen. They wait for their turn to talk. Is that why you're always so quiet? I'm quiet because words are expensive. You should only spend them when they matter. Elena met his gaze. And do they matter now? With you? He considered. More than they have in a long time. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her, and it made something warm and frightening bloom in Elena's chest, something she immediately tried to crush. She couldn't afford to feel warmth toward Dominic, couldn't afford to see him as anything other than her captor, because the moment she did, the moment she let herself care, she would lose what little power she had left. But it was getting harder to remember that when he looked at her like she mattered. Back at the fortress, the dynamic between them continued to shift in subtle, dangerous ways. Dominic started joining her in the library in the evenings. He didn't speak much, just sat in one of the leather chairs reading his own books while she worked through the collection. But his presence was oddly comfortable, and sometimes they would discuss what they were reading, their conversations ranging from philosophy to poetry to the nature of power itself. Machiavelli was wrong, Elena said one night, looking up from the prince. Dominic raised an eyebrow. Bold claim. He treats fear and love as mutually exclusive. But I think the most effective rulers inspire both. Fear keeps people from betraying you. Love makes them not want to. And what do I inspire in you? Elena met his gaze. You already know the answer to that. Tell me anyway. Fear, she said honestly, but not the kind Machiavelli meant. I'm not afraid you'll hurt me. I'm afraid of what it means that I'm starting not to hate you. Dominic closed his book slowly. Would hating me be easier? Much. Then by all means hate me. I won't take it personally. That's not how feelings work. You don't choose them. Don't you? He stood, moving to the window. I've spent my entire life choosing what to feel, choosing when to feel it, choosing how much to let in and when to shut it out. It's the only way to survive. That's not surviving. That's existing. There's a difference. He looked at her over his shoulder. And what do you think I should do instead? Feel everything? Let it all in? That's how people get destroyed. Or how they become human. Dominic turned fully, and there was something raw in his expression now, something almost vulnerable. I was human once. It didn't end well. What happened? I loved someone. I trusted someone. And they used it to destroy everything I cared about. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Elena could hear the pain beneath it. So I learned. I adapted. And I decided that feeling nothing was better than feeling everything. And has it been? Better? He didn't answer for a long time, then quietly, until recently. I thought so. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Elena knew she should leave, should retreat to the safety of distance. But instead she stood and crossed to where he stood by the window. "What changed recently?" she asked. Dominic looked down at her, and in his pale eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. "You did." For a moment neither of them moved. The library was silent except for the crackle of the fire, the distant sound of the sea. Elena's heart was racing, her mind screaming warnings, but her body, her traitorous body, was leaning toward him like gravity. Then Dominic stepped back. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice carefully neutral again. "It's late." The spell broke. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and fled the library before she could do something foolish. Like forget that the man she was starting to care for was the same man who had bought her. The next morning, everything changed. Elena woke to shouting in the courtyard below. She rushed to the balcony and saw Dominic surrounded by armed men, not his guards, but others, dressed in dark tactical gear, weapons drawn. Her heart stopped. Before she could move, Lucia burst into the room, her face pale. "Get dressed, quickly. Don't ask questions." "What's happening?" "Now, Elena." Elena dressed with shaking hands, her mind racing. Outside, she could hear more voices, engines, the sound of chaos. Lucia grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. "Stay close to me. Don't speak to anyone. Don't make eye contact." They rushed through the corridors, Lucia navigating with the efficiency of someone who'd prepared for this exact scenario. They emerged into a side hallway just as gunshots rang out, sharp, deafening cracks that made Elena's ears ring. "What's happening?" she gasped. "Rivals," Lucia said grimly. "They've come for Mr. Varelli." "Why?" "Because he's the king, and every king has enemies who want his crown." They reached a hidden door in the wall, and Lucia pulled it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "Go," she ordered. "There's a tunnel at the bottom. It leads to the beach. There's a boat waiting." "What about Dominic?" "He can take care of himself. You need to go, now." "But, Elena," Lucia's grip tightened. "He made me swear that if anything ever happened, my first priority was getting you to safety. Don't make me break that promise." More gunshots. Closer now. Elena made a split-second decision. She started down the stairs, Lucia behind her, and they plunged into the darkness of the tunnel. The passage was narrow, carved from raw stone, lit only by Lucia's flashlight. They ran, Elena's lungs burning, until they emerged onto a hidden cove. A small boat bobbed in the water, engine running. "Get in," Lucia said. Elena hesitated. "Where will it take me?" "Away. That's all that matters." "And Dominic?" "We'll find you when it's safe." Lucia pushed her toward the boat. "Please, Elena, go." Elena climbed in, her hands shaking. The boatman, one of Dominic's guards, immediately pulled away from shore, the engine roaring to life. As they sped away from the fortress, Elena looked back and saw smoke rising from one of the towers, heard the distant echo of continued gunfire. And she realized something that should have terrified her but didn't. She was finally free. She could go anywhere, disappear into any port, any city, start a new life where Dominic Varelli would never find her. But all she could think about was whether he was still alive. And somewhere between captivity and this moment, Elena Rossi had stopped being Dominic's prisoner. She'd become something far more dangerous. She'd become someone who cared whether he survived. The boat carried Elena north along the coast for 3 hours before pulling into a small marina outside Genoa. The guard, a man named Marco who'd barely spoken during the journey, handed her an envelope thick with cash and a set of identification papers she'd never seen before. "Mr. Varelli prepared these months ago," Marco said. "Just in case. There's enough money for 6 months. More if you're careful." Elena stared at the passport bearing her photograph but a different name. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Anywhere you want." "That's the point." Marco's expression softened slightly. "He wanted you to have choices, even if he couldn't give you anything else." The words struck her like a physical blow. Dominic had planned for this. had prepared an escape route, identification, money, everything she would need to disappear completely. He'd built her a door out of the cage, even while keeping her locked inside it. "Is he alive?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know. Communications went dark an hour ago." Marco handed her a phone. "If he survives, he'll call this number. If he doesn't—" He paused. "If he doesn't, you take that money and you build a life somewhere he never existed. Understood?" Elena nodded numbly. Marco left her standing on the dock, and for the first time in months, Elena was truly alone. Free. Exactly what she'd wanted. So why did it feel like she was drowning? She found a small hotel near the marina, paid cash for a room, and locked herself inside. The phone Marco had given her sat on the nightstand, silent and accusatory. Elena stared at it for hours, willing it to ring, terrified of what it would mean if it did. Night fell. The phone stayed silent. She tried to sleep, but couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dominic standing in that courtyard surrounded by armed men, saw the smoke rising from the fortress, heard the gunshots echoing across the water. By dawn, Elena had made a decision she knew was insane. She couldn't just run, not without knowing. She left the hotel and found an internet cafe, using the cash to buy an hour of computer time. Her hands shook as she searched for news about the attack, but there was nothing. No reports of violence, no mention of Dominic Varelli or his fortress. Either the assault had been contained completely, or someone was working very hard to keep it quiet. Elena tried a different approach. She searched for Dominic's name, looking for anything that might tell her who he really was, what kind of empire he'd built. What she found made her stomach turn. Dominic Varelli wasn't just a criminal. He was a ghost. A name whispered in connection with everything from arms dealing to political manipulation to business empires that spanned continents. He'd built an organization so vast and so carefully hidden that even law enforcement couldn't pin down exactly what he controlled. But buried in the articles and rumors, Elena found something else. Stories about an incident 15 years ago. A fire that had killed Dominic's wife and daughter. An investigation that went nowhere. Whispers that it hadn't been an accident at all, but a message from rivals who wanted to break him. They'd succeeded in taking everything he loved, and instead of breaking, Dominic had become something harder, something untouchable. Until he bought a girl at an auction and made the mistake of caring. Elena closed the browser, her hands shaking. She understood now why Dominic had built those walls so high, why he'd chosen to feel nothing rather than risk everything again. And she understood that by existing in his life, by mattering to him, she'd made him vulnerable in a way he hadn't been in over a decade. The attack wasn't just about power or territory. It was about exploiting the one weakness Dominic Varelli had allowed himself in 15 years. Her. The phone rang. Elena's heart stopped. She fumbled for it, nearly dropping it in her haste. "Hello?" Silence on the other end. Then, finally, Dominic's voice. Rough, tired, alive. "Where are you?" Relief flooded through her so powerfully she had to sit down. "Genoa, a hotel near the marina. Are you hurt?" "I'm alive. That's what matters." A pause. "Are you safe?" "Yes. Marco got me out. He gave me papers, money." "Good. That's good." Another long pause. "Listen to me carefully, Elena. I want you to take that money and go. Far. Somewhere I never told you about. Somewhere no one would think to look." "What? Why?" "Because they came for you. The attack. It wasn't about territory or business. It was about leverage. They know about you now. They know you matter." His voice was hollow. "And that makes you a target." Elena's blood ran cold. "Who are they?" "A syndicate out of Eastern Europe, the Kozlov brothers. We've been at odds for years, but I'd managed to maintain a stalemate until they found out about you." She heard him exhale slowly. "They think if they take you, they can control me. And they're right. Dominic, this is my fault. I should never have brought you into this world, should never have let myself—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter now. What matters is getting you somewhere safe, permanently safe, which means somewhere I'm not. You want me to run. I want you to live. There's a difference." Elena closed her eyes, her mind racing. Every rational part of her brain screamed that he was right, that she should take this chance, this gift of freedom, and disappear into a life where men didn't buy women, and violence wasn't the price of breathing. But another part, the part that had studied redemption and transformation, the part that had seen vulnerability flash in Dominic's pale eyes, that part couldn't let go. "What if I don't want to run?" she said quietly. "Then you're a fool." "Maybe. But I'm a fool who needs to know something first." She took a breath. "Are you planning to come after them? The Kozlov brothers?" Silence. "Dominic, answer me." "Yes," he said finally. "I'm going to end this permanently." "Then I'm coming back." "Absolutely not. You don't get to decide that anymore." "Elena, this isn't a negotiation." "You're right. It's not." Her voice was steady now, certain. "You gave me papers, money, freedom. You gave me every tool I needed to disappear, and I'm choosing not to use them. I'm choosing to come back." "Why?" The word was ragged, desperate. "Why would you choose this?" Because somewhere between captivity and caring, between fear and understanding, Elena had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Because she'd seen the man beneath the monster, and she couldn't unsee him. Because running away now felt like abandoning not a captor, but someone who mattered. "Because you would have come for me," she said simply. "If they'd taken me, you would have burned the world down to get me back. I know you would have." "That's different." "How?" "Because I—" He stopped, and Elena could hear the struggle in his silence, the words he couldn't say, the admission he couldn't make. "Because you're mine." "Then let me make the same choice you did. Let me decide what I'm willing to risk." "I can't protect you if you're here. And I can't live with myself if I run while you're in danger because of me." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Elena could hear Dominic's breathing on the other end, could almost feel the war raging inside him, the need to keep her safe warring with something else, something that sounded dangerously like hope. "Where are you right now?" she asked. "A safe house in Rome, regrouping. Send someone for me, please." "Elena, send someone or I'll find my way back myself." And we both know that would be significantly more dangerous. She heard what might have been a laugh, bitter, exhausted. "You're going to be the death of me." "Not if I can help it." Another long pause. Then, quietly, "There's a car waiting outside your hotel. Black sedan. The driver's name is Andreas. He'll bring you to me." "How did you—" "I've had people watching you since the boat landed. Did you really think I'd send you into the world completely unprotected?" His voice softened. "I meant what I said about giving you freedom, but I never said I wouldn't make sure you survived it." Despite everything, Elena smiled. "Control freak." "You have no idea." "I'm starting to." "Elena." His voice was serious now. "When you get here, when you see what I have to do to end this, you might change your mind about coming back, about all of this. Then I'll change my mind, but at least I'll have chosen it myself." Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The car's outside. Come home." And for the first time, when Elena thought about the fortress by the sea, the word didn't feel like a lie. The drive to Rome took 8 hours. Andreas was silent for most of the journey, but Elena caught him watching her in the rearview mirror, his expression a mixture of concern and something like respect. "You know you're crazy, right?" he said finally, as they neared the city. "Coming back like this." "So I've been told." "Most people run from Dominic Varelli. They don't run toward him." "I'm not most people." Andreas smiled slightly. "No, I'm starting to see that." They drove through Rome's crowded streets as the sun set, eventually turning down a narrow alley in Trastevere. The safe house turned out to be a renovated warehouse, nondescript from the outside but clearly fortified within. Guards stood at the entrance, weapons concealed but present. Andreas walked her inside through a maze of corridors until they reached a set of heavy doors. He knocked once, then pushed them open. "She's here, boss." The room beyond was sparse, a large space with maps spread across tables, computer screens glowing in the corner, and a handful of men who all looked like they'd seen combat. They turned when Elena entered, their expressions ranging from surprise to disapproval, and in the center of it all stood Dominic. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the hours since she'd seen him. His shirt was blood-stained, his jaw dark with stubble, and there was a bandage visible beneath his collar. But his eyes, those pale, fierce eyes, locked onto hers with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. "Leave us," he said quietly, not looking away from Elena. The room emptied in seconds. When the door closed behind the last man, Dominic crossed to her in 3 long strides. For a moment, Elena thought he might actually shake her, but instead he stopped just inches away, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides, as if he didn't trust himself to touch her. "You're insane," he said. "You already mentioned that on the phone." "I'm serious, Elena. You shouldn't be here." "And yet here I am." His jaw tightened. "I could send you back." "You could, but you won't." "Why are you so certain?" Because she could see it in his eyes. The relief, the fear, the desperate, unspoken need that he would never admit but couldn't hide. "Because you don't actually want me to go," Elena said softly. "You want me safe, but you want me here more." Dominic closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "You're right, and I hate that you're right. What happened at the fortress?" He opened his eyes, and the vulnerability was gone, replaced by cold rage. "The Kozlov brothers sent a team, 12 men. They breached the perimeter thinking they'd find you, use you to negotiate. They were wrong about the first part." His voice was flat. "We eliminated them all." "And the brothers themselves? Still alive? Still in play? Which is why I need to finish this before they make another move." He turned to the maps spread across the table. "They're hiding in a compound outside Naples, fortified, well-armed, but I know how to get inside." Elena moved closer, studying the maps. "How?" "They're hosting a meeting tomorrow night, bringing in allies from across Europe, showing strength after the failed attack." His finger traced a route on the map. "I'm going to walk in, challenge their leadership directly, and end this the old way." "You mean a suicide mission?" "I mean a declaration of war. There are rules in our world. If you attack a man's home, his family, you answer for it personally. The Kozlovs violated those rules. Now they pay the price." "By you getting yourself killed?" Dominic looked at her. "I don't plan to die." "Plans change." "Not this one." Elena stared at him, at the grim certainty in his face, and felt fear claw at her chest. "There has to be another way." "There isn't. Not one that ends this permanently." He reached out, almost touching her face before pulling back. "This is why I wanted you gone, so you wouldn't have to see this. So you wouldn't have to know what I really am when I stop pretending to be civilized." "I already know what you are." "Do you?" His voice was harsh now. "Because tomorrow night I'm going to walk into that compound and I'm going to kill everyone who stands between me and the Kozlov brothers. Not arrest them, not negotiate with them. Kill them. With my own hands if necessary. And I won't feel remorse or hesitation or anything resembling the man you've been getting to know." He stepped closer. "That's who I am, Elena. That's what I do. And if you stay, you'll have to live with that knowledge." Elena met his gaze steadily. "Then I'll live with it. Just like you'll have to live with the fact that I'm not leaving." "You're impossible. I learned from the best." Something cracked in Dominic's expression, the mask slipping just enough to show the man beneath. "I don't deserve this. Don't deserve you choosing to stay." "Probably not, but I'm choosing it anyway." "Why?" The question was raw, desperate. "Why would you choose this? Choose me!" Elena didn't have a good answer, couldn't explain how fear had transformed into something else, how captivity had given way to connection, how somewhere in the space between hatred and understanding she'd found something that looked dangerously like love. So instead of answering, she did something she'd never done before. She closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him. Dominic went rigid. For a moment he didn't move, didn't breathe, as if her touch might shatter him. Then slowly his arms came up and around her, pulling her close with a fierceness that bordered on desperation. They stood like that for a long time, neither speaking, and Elena felt his heartbeat against her cheek, rapid, unsteady, human. "If I don't come back tomorrow," he said quietly, his voice rough against her hair, "I need you to promise me something. Don't promise me you'll use those papers, that money. Promise me you'll disappear and build a life somewhere safe, somewhere no one from this world will ever find you." Elena pulled back just enough to look up at him. "I'm not making that promise." Elena, if you don't come back tomorrow, I'll grieve. I'll probably hate you a little for getting yourself killed, but I won't run. Because running now would mean everything, all of this, everything we've become to each other. It would mean it was all for nothing. She held his gaze. So you're going to have to come back, because I refuse to let this story end with you playing martyr. Dominic stared at her, something like wonder crossing his face. How did you get so brave? I learned it from someone who bought me at an auction and then spent months showing me that strength isn't about control. It's about choosing who you want to protect, who you want to become. She reached up, touching his face gently. Come back to me tomorrow. Please. His hand covered hers, pressing it against his cheek. I'll try. Not good enough. Promise me. I can't promise something I might not be able to keep. Then give me the next best thing. Give me hope. Dominic leaned down until his forehead touched hers, his breath warm against her skin. I promise I'll fight like hell to come back. That enough? It'll have to be. They stood like that, suspended in the moment before everything changed, and Elena memorized the feel of him, the solid warmth, the barely controlled strength, the vulnerability he showed no one else. Tomorrow, he would become the monster he'd warned her about, would shed blood and wage war in a world that traded violence like currency. But tonight, in this quiet room, he was just a man holding on to something he was terrified to lose. The next day passed in tense preparation. Elena watched from the edges as Dominic and his men planned the assault with military precision. She understood perhaps a quarter of what they discussed, terms like entry points and extraction routes and contingency protocols that made her realize just how far outside her world she'd stepped. But she also saw the way Dominic's men looked at him, not with fear, though there was certainly respect tinged with caution, but with loyalty, the kind earned through shared blood and proven leadership. Whatever else Dominic Varelli was, he inspired devotion in those who knew him best. As evening approached, the energy in the safe house shifted. Men checked weapons, put on tactical gear, moved with the focused calm of soldiers before battle. Elena stayed out of the way, watching from the doorway of an adjacent room as Dominic prepared. He'd changed into dark clothes designed for movement and stealth, and as he strapped on a shoulder holster, she saw the scars she'd only glimpsed before, evidence of a life lived violently, survived narrowly. He caught her watching and paused. You should stay inside. Lock the door. Andreas will be here with 2 others. They'll keep you safe. What time will you be back? Late, maybe not until morning. He crossed to her, stopping close enough that she could see the storm brewing in his eyes. If something goes wrong, if you don't hear from me by noon tomorrow, Andreas knows what to do. I don't want to hear the contingency plans. Elena, I want you to come back. That's the only plan that matters. Dominic's hand came up, cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything about the man standing before her, armed and dangerous. I meant what I said last night. I'll fight like hell to come back to you. Then go do what you need to do. But remember, I'll be waiting, and I don't wait patiently. Despite the gravity of the moment, he smiled slightly. I've noticed. He started to pull away, but Elena caught his hand. Dominic, be careful. Careful isn't really my strength. Then be smart, be ruthless, be whatever you need to be. Just be alive when it's over. He studied her face like he was memorizing it. Then, moving slowly enough that she could pull away if she wanted, he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead. It was chaste, almost reverent, and it said everything neither of them had found words for. Wait for me, he whispered against her skin. Always. Then he was gone, and Elena was left standing in the doorway, listening to the sound of vehicles pulling away, carrying Dominic toward a violence she could only imagine. Andreas found her an hour later, still standing in the same spot. You should eat something, he said gently. It's going to be a long night. I'm not hungry. With respect, Signora, starving yourself won't bring him back faster. Elena turned to look at him. How often does he do this? Go into situations like tonight? Andreas considered the question carefully. Less than he used to. Before you came, he was reckless. Took risks no leader should take. Almost like he was daring the world to finally kill him. He paused. But lately, since you, he's been more careful. Like he finally has something to lose again. He told me about his wife, his daughter. Then you know why he built those walls so high. why he swore never to let anyone matter again. Andreas met her eyes. But you broke through anyway. I'm not sure if that makes you brave or insane. Can it be both? He smiled. I suppose it can. He gestured toward the kitchen. Come, let me make you coffee, at least. And then I'll tell you stories about your husband that will help pass the time. Will they make me feel better or worse? Honestly, probably worse, but at least you'll understand who he really is. Elena followed him to the kitchen, and over strong coffee and the long hours of waiting, Andreas told her about Dominic Varelli, not the monster from the auction, not the ghost from the internet searches, but the man his people knew, the one who paid for his soldiers' children's educations, who remembered birthdays and showed up at weddings, who could be brutally violent one moment and surprisingly kind the next. He's not a good man, Andreas said as midnight approached. But he's not evil either. He's just someone who learned early that the world doesn't reward goodness, so he became something the world would fear instead, something that could protect the few things he cared about. And now I'm one of those things. Now you're the only thing, which is why tonight matters so much. If the Kozlovs win, if they take him down, they'll come for you next. And without Dominic's protection, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Elena wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers, and prayed to powers she wasn't sure she believed in that Dominic would keep his promise, that he would fight like hell to come back. The call came at 4 a.m. Elena had dozed off on the couch, Andreas keeping watch nearby, when his phone buzzed. He answered immediately, listened for a moment, then his expression shifted into something like relief. Understood. We'll be ready. He hung up and looked at Elena. They're coming back. ETA 20 minutes. Elena's heart leaped. Is he alive? That's all I know. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Elena's life. She paced the room, unable to sit, unable to think about anything except the sound of approaching vehicles. Finally, she heard engines, doors slamming, voices in the courtyard. Elena ran to the entrance, Andreas close behind, and watched as men poured out of black SUVs. They were bloodied, exhausted, moving with the careful precision of people checking themselves for injuries. And then Dominic emerged from the lead vehicle. He was covered in blood, some his, most not. His shirt was torn and there was a gash above his eye that would need stitches. But he was standing, moving, alive. His eyes found hers immediately, and something in his expression cracked open. Elena didn't remember crossing the distance between them. One moment she was in the doorway, the next she was in his arms, and Dominic was holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. You came back, she whispered against his chest. I promised. Is it over? It's over. His voice was rough, exhausted. The Kozlov brothers are dead. Their organization is scattered. No one will come for you now. Elena pulled back enough to look at his face, at the weariness and violence written there. This was what he'd warned her about. The man who could kill without hesitation, who could wage war and emerge victorious. And she found that it didn't change what she felt. If anything, seeing him like this, raw, honest, stripped of all pretense, only made him more real. You're hurt, she said, touching the cut above his eye gently. I'll live. He caught her hand, pressing it against his face. I kept my promise. I came back. Yes, you did. And you waited. Yes, I did. They stood like that, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, covered in blood and exhaustion and relief, and Elena knew that something fundamental had shifted between them. She was no longer his prisoner. He was no longer just her captor. They were something else now, something neither of them had names for yet. But whatever it was theirs, chosen freely by both of them despite everything that should have kept them apart. Come inside, she said softly. Let me clean those wounds. Dominic let her lead him inside, past his men who watched with knowing expressions, into a small bathroom where she made him sit while she gathered supplies. As Elena carefully cleaned the cut above his eye, Dominic caught her wrist gently. I need to tell you something, he said. You're going to need stitches? Besides that, he held her gaze. When I was in that compound tonight, when everything went to hell and I thought I might not make it out, all I could think about was you, about this, about getting back here so I could tell you. He stopped, and Elena saw the struggle playing out across his face. The words he'd never said to anyone, the admission that terrified him more than any enemy. "Tell me what?" she prompted gently. Dominic took a breath. "That somewhere between buying you and right now, you stopped being something I owned and became someone I—" He paused. "Someone who matters, more than anything has mattered in 15 years. It wasn't quite a confession of love, but for a man who'd spent over a decade building walls, it was everything." Elena set down the bandage she'd been holding and moved between his knees, close enough to see every fleck of gray in his pale eyes. "You matter to me too," she said quietly. "I know I shouldn't feel that way. I know this whole situation is insane, but somewhere between hating you and understanding you, I crossed a line I can't uncross. You could still run. Now that the threat's gone, you could take those papers and disappear, build that life somewhere safe." "I could, but I won't. Why not?" Elena thought about all the reasons she could give, about companionship and understanding, and the strange intimacy that had grown between captive and captor. But in the end, there was only one truth that mattered. Because when I thought you might not come back, I realized something. Freedom isn't worth much if you're not free to choose what matters to you. She touched his face gently. "And you matter to me. This matters to me. Whatever we're building here, it's mine, and I'm not walking away from it." Dominic's hands came up to frame her face, his touch reverent. "You're sure? Because once you make this choice, once you decide to stay with me willingly, you can't take it back. You'll be part of my world, all of it. I know. And you're still choosing it? I'm still choosing you." For a moment, Dominic just looked at her, as if trying to understand how this had happened. How a girl he'd bought at an auction had become the one thing in his carefully controlled world that he couldn't predict, couldn't command, couldn't live without. Then he pulled her close and kissed her. It was nothing like Elena had imagined. There was no violence in it, no demand, just a desperate tenderness that spoke of fear and hope, and the terrifying vulnerability of letting someone matter. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted quietly. "How to let someone in. How to be something other than what I've built myself into." "Then we'll figure it out together," Elena said. "One day at a time. And if I fail, if I hurt you without meaning to, then I'll tell you and you'll try to do better. That's how it works." Dominic laughed softly, the sound exhausted and wondering. "How did you get so wise?" "I read a lot. Clearly, I should have spent more time in that library." Elena smiled, and for the first time since the auction, it felt completely genuine. "Lucky for you, I'm an excellent teacher." "Is that so?" "Absolutely. First lesson. Stop trying to control everything." "That's going to be harder than killing the Kozlovs." "I know, but I have faith in you." Dominic pulled her close again, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to something real, something good. And maybe she was. Maybe that's what love was. Not the fairy tale version, but the real kind. Messy and complicated and built from broken pieces. Two people who shouldn't work choosing each other anyway. Elena had come to the fortress as property, but she was leaving it as something else entirely, as someone who'd made a choice, and discovered that freedom wasn't about escape. It was about finding something worth staying for. They returned to the fortress 3 days later, and Elena saw it with different eyes. The stone walls that had once seemed like prison bars now felt like shelter. The halls that had echoed with her loneliness now held the promise of something she was only beginning to understand. The sea that had called to her with escape now sang a different song, one of constancy, of belonging. Dominic had been quiet during the drive, his hand resting on hers in the back seat, thumb tracing absent circles on her wrist as if reassuring himself she was real. The violence in Naples had shaken something loose in him, stripped away another layer of the armor he'd worn for so long. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked as they approached the gates. He glanced at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "That I almost lost this. Lost you. Before I even understood what I had." "But you didn't." "No, but it was close." His hand tightened on hers. Too close. The gates opened, and they drove through into the courtyard where Lucia waited, her face breaking into a relieved smile, when she saw them both emerge from the car unharmed. "Welcome home, Signora," she said, pulling Elena into an unexpected embrace. "We were so worried." Elena returned the hug, surprised by the warmth of it, by the genuine affection in Lucia's voice. "I'm fine. We both are." Lucia pulled back, her eyes moving between them, and something knowing crossed her expression. "Yes, I can see that." Over the following weeks, Elena discovered what it meant to truly live in the fortress rather than simply exist there. Dominic had been right when he'd said she was part of his world now. Men still came to conduct business, deals were still made in whispered conversations behind closed doors. The machinery of his empire continued to turn, but she was no longer locked away from it. She sat in on meetings when Dominic asked her opinion, her insights surprising both of them. She walked the grounds freely, making friends with the guards who'd once been her jailers. And at night, she and Dominic would retreat to the library or the balcony overlooking the sea, talking until dawn about everything and nothing, philosophy and poetry, power and choice, the strange path that had led them both to this impossible moment. "I never thought I'd want this," Dominic admitted one evening as they sat on the balcony, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. "A life with someone in it, someone who mattered." "What changed?" He looked at her, and the vulnerability in his expression still caught her off guard. "You did. You made me remember what it felt like to care about something beyond survival, beyond power." He paused. "You made me remember what it felt like to be human." Elena leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. "For what it's worth, you made me braver, stronger. You made me believe I could survive anything." "Even me?" "Especially you." He laughed quietly, the sound warmer than she'd ever heard it, and pulled her closer. It was in one of these peaceful moments, curled together in the library as rain drummed against the windows, that Elena first noticed something was wrong. A wave of nausea hit her so suddenly she had to pull away from Dominic's embrace, pressing a hand to her stomach. "Elena?" His concern was immediate. "What's wrong?" "I don't know, I just feel—" Another wave, stronger this time, and she stood quickly, heading for the bathroom. She was sick violently, her body rejecting everything she'd eaten that day. Dominic appeared in the doorway, worry etched across his features. "How long has this been happening?" "It hasn't. This is the first time." Elena rinsed her mouth, her hands shaking slightly. "Maybe something I ate." But even as she said it, her mind was racing, counting back weeks, trying to remember. When had her last cycle been? Before Naples? Before the attack on the fortress? Before any of this had become real? The realization hit her like a physical blow. "Elena." Dominic's voice was gentle but insistent. "When was the last time?" "I don't know." She met his eyes in the mirror, seeing her own dawning understanding reflected there. "I haven't been paying attention. Everything's been so chaotic. We need to find out." "Now?" "Now." Within an hour, Dominic had called a doctor to the fortress. Not just any doctor, but one he trusted completely, a woman named Dr. Rossi, who'd worked with his organization for years. She arrived with her medical bag and a knowing expression. "I heard you might need my services," she said, her tone warm and professional. "Let's take a look, shall we?" Elena submitted to the examination, Dominic pacing outside the bedroom like a caged animal. She could hear his footsteps through the door, back and forth, relentless, nervous energy barely contained. Dr. Rossi worked efficiently, asking questions, taking samples, her expression giving nothing away. Finally, she sat back and met Elena's eyes. "Well?" Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "Congratulations, Kara. You're pregnant. About 6 weeks, I'd estimate." The words hung in the air, and Elena felt the world tilt on its axis. Pregnant. She was carrying Dominic's child. A life created in the space between captivity and freedom, between fear and love, between everything she'd been and everything she was becoming. "Are you sure?" she managed. "Quite sure. I'll run a blood test to confirm, but based on the examination and your symptoms," Dr. Rossi smiled gently, "you're going to be a mother." Elena's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, the gesture protective, wondering. A child. Their child. "Does he know?" Dr. Rossi asked. "Not yet." "Would you like me to tell him?" Or would you prefer... I'll tell him. Elena took a shaky breath. I need to tell him. Dr. Rossi gathered her things, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, I've known Dominic Varelli for 15 years. I've never seen him the way he is with you. Whatever darkness he's lived through, you've brought him back from it. She smiled. A child will only strengthen that light. After the doctor left, Elena sat on the edge of the bed, her mind spinning. How did you tell someone like Dominic, someone who'd lost a family before, someone who'd sworn never to risk that kind of pain again, that he was about to become a father? The door opened and Dominic stepped inside, his face carefully controlled but his eyes betraying everything. Well? He asked. Elena looked up at him, this complicated, dangerous, unexpectedly tender man who'd stolen her life and then given it back, transformed, and felt tears prick her eyes. I'm pregnant. For a long moment, Dominic didn't move, didn't breathe. He just stared at her as if she'd spoken in a language he'd forgotten. Then slowly, his knees gave out. He collapsed to the floor in front of her, not in weakness, but in something that looked like surrender. His hands gripped her knees, his head bowed, and Elena saw his shoulders shake. Dominic, I can't. His voice was raw, broken. I can't lose another child. I can't survive it again. Elena's heart cracked open. She slid off the bed, kneeling with him on the floor, framing his face with her hands and forcing him to look at her. You're not going to lose us, she said fiercely. Do you hear me? You're not going to lose us. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise to fight like hell to stay alive. I can promise to be careful, to let you protect us, to do everything right. She pressed her forehead to his. And I can promise that this time you're not alone in this. We're in it together. Dominic's arms came around her, pulling her close, and she felt him trembling. This man who'd faced down armies, who'd killed without hesitation, who'd built an empire on violence and fear, he was shaking in her arms because he was terrified of hope. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. I don't know how to be a father. I failed before. You didn't fail. The world failed you. Someone took them from you. Elena pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But that's not going to happen this time. You're stronger now. We're stronger together, and I refuse to let fear steal this from us before we even begin. He searched her face, looking for certainty, for reassurance, for any sign that she understood what she was signing up for. And Elena met his gaze steadily, letting him see everything. The fear, yes, but also the determination, the fierce protectiveness already blooming inside her. Are you scared? He asked. Terrified. But you want this? Elena thought about it honestly. This wasn't how she'd imagined becoming a mother. Not in a fortress, not with a man who'd bought her, not in a world where violence was currency and safety was illusion. But somewhere in the chaos, something had taken root, something worth protecting. Yes, she said. I want this. I want us. All of it. Dominic closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there were tears on his lashes. I'm going to do everything in my power to keep you both safe. Both of you. I swear it. I know you will. He placed a hand on her stomach, his touch gentle, reverent. A baby, he said wonderingly. Our baby. Yes. When? Dr. Rossi said about 6 weeks along, so sometime in early summer. Dominic nodded slowly, and Elena could almost see his mind working, already planning, already building new walls to keep this fragile thing safe. We'll need better security, a proper medical team on standby. I'll need to eliminate any remaining threats. Dominic, he looked at her, we have time. We have months. You don't have to solve everything tonight. I need to know you're safe. I am safe. I'm here with you, aren't I? He pulled her close again, and they stayed like that on the floor of the bedroom, holding each other in the quiet aftermath of revelation, and Elena felt something shift in the very foundation of her world. This child changed everything. Not because it made their story simpler or easier or more conventional, but because it gave them both something they'd lost. Dominic his chance at redemption, Elena her power to choose not just her own future, but the future of someone who would depend on them both. They were bound now in a way that went beyond contracts or captivity or even love. They were creating a life together, and that life deserved better than the world that had brought them together, which meant they would have to build something new. In the days that followed, Elena watched Dominic transform. The man who'd been content ruling from the shadows, who'd built an empire on fear and controlled violence, suddenly became obsessed with legitimacy. He started divesting from the darker corners of his business, meeting with lawyers and accountants, looking for ways to transform his holdings into something clean. "What are you doing?" Elena asked one afternoon, finding him surrounded by contracts and financial statements. "Making sure our child inherits something worth having, not blood money, not empires built on suffering." He looked up at her, determination burning in his pale eyes. "I can't erase what I've done. Can't pretend I'm something I'm not. But I can make sure the next generation doesn't have to carry that weight." "Dominic, that's going to take years, maybe decades." Then I'd better start now." Elena moved to stand beside his chair, running her fingers through his hair. "You know you don't have to do this. I'm not asking you to change who you are." "I know, but I'm asking myself to." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I spent 15 years becoming something the world would fear. Maybe it's time I spent the next 15 becoming something my child can be proud of. They'll be proud of you regardless." "Maybe, but I want to deserve it." He stood, pulling her into his arms. "I want to deserve you both, and that means being better than I've been." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. This wasn't the forced transformation of a captive into what their captor wanted. This was authentic change, driven by genuine desire to be worthy of the love he'd found, and it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever witnessed. "I love you," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Dominic went very still. "What?" "I love you. I think—" She said it again, louder, surer. "I know I shouldn't. I know this whole thing is insane, but I do. I love you." For a moment he just stared at her, as if she'd spoken in a language he'd forgotten. Then his hands came up to frame her face, and he kissed her with a desperation that spoke of years of isolation finally breaking open. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he whispered. "I've loved you since you stood on that cliffside and chose to come back. Maybe before. I don't know when it happened, but it did. And it terrifies me, and I wouldn't change it for anything." They stood like that, wrapped in each other, the future blooming uncertain and bright before them. The pregnancy brought changes beyond Dominic's business dealings. The fortress itself began to transform. Rooms that had been closed off for years were opened, cleaned, repurposed. A nursery was designed, though Elena insisted they wait until after the first trimester to actually prepare it. Gardens were planted, softer elements introduced to the stone and steel. And Elena herself changed. Her body began to show signs of the life growing inside her. The slight swell of her stomach, the glow in her cheeks, the fierce protectiveness that rose whenever Dominic suggested something might be too risky. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she informed him when he tried to forbid her from walking on the beach. "I know that, but nothing. I've been locked away before. I won't do it again, not even for good reasons." Dominic sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're going to make this very difficult, aren't you?" "Absolutely." Despite his worry, he let her have her freedom. Let her walk and explore and live, though she noticed guards were never far away, and he checked in constantly throughout the day. It was sweet in its own overprotective way, and Elena found she didn't mind as much as she might have before, because she understood what drove it, not control, but fear of loss. And she couldn't fault him for that. The first real complication came in her 10th week. Elena woke in the middle of the night to sharp cramping, a pain that radiated through her abdomen and left her gasping. Beside her, Dominic woke immediately, his instincts sharp even in sleep. "What's wrong?" "I don't know. Something—" Another cramp, stronger this time, and Elena felt genuine fear spike through her. Something's not right. Dominic had Dr. Rossi at the fortress within the hour, and Elena endured another examination, this one more thorough, more serious. The doctor's expression gave nothing away as she worked, but Elena could see the concern in the tightness around her eyes. Finally, Dr. Rossi sat back. "The baby's fine. Heartbeat is strong. Development is on track." Elena felt relief flood through her. "Then what's causing the pain?" "Stress. Your body is reacting to elevated cortisol levels. You need to rest more, reduce anxiety where possible." She looked between Elena and Dominic. I know that's easier said than done given your situation, but for the health of both mother and baby, it's essential. After the doctor left, Dominic pulled Elena close, his hand protective over her stomach. No more stress, he said firmly. I'm pulling back from active operations. Andreas can handle most of it. I'm staying here with you. Dominic, you can't just abandon your business. Watch me. You and this baby are more important than any deal, any territory, any alliance. If choosing between my empire and my family means walking away from everything I've built, then that's what I'll do. Elena turned in his arms to face him. I don't want you to resent me. Resent us. Resent you? He looked genuinely baffled. Elena, you gave me a reason to want to be better. You gave me hope when I thought I was too far gone for it. How could I possibly resent that? Because you're sacrificing. I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm choosing. Finally, after 15 years of running from the possibility of caring about anything, I'm choosing what matters. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. And what matters is right here. True to his word, Dominic stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his organization. He delegated, trusted his people, and stayed close to the fortress. Days were spent in quiet domesticity that would have seemed impossible months ago, reading together in the library, walking the gardens, planning for a future that no longer felt like a dream, but a promise. And slowly, carefully, Elena began to let herself believe it was real. The second trimester brought relief from the nausea and an energy that had Elena practically glowing. Doctor, Rossi pronounced both mother and baby healthy, and for the first time since the pregnancy was discovered, they allowed themselves to truly celebrate. We should find out, Elena said one afternoon as they sat on the balcony. Boy or girl? I want to know. Dominic looked surprised. I thought you wanted to wait. I did, but now I want to be able to picture them, talk to them, know who they're going to be. He smiled, and Elena was struck again by how much younger happiness made him look. Then we'll find out. Dr. Rossi brought the ultrasound equipment to the fortress the following week. Elena lay on the bed, Dominic holding her hand, both of them barely breathing as the doctor moved the wand over her stomach. And there, on the screen, was their baby. Tiny, but unmistakable, moving, alive, real. Everything looks perfect, Dr. Rossi said, her voice warm. Would you like to know the sex? Elena looked at Dominic, who nodded. Yes, they said together. Dr. Rossi smiled. It's a girl. Congratulations. A girl. They were having a daughter. Elena felt tears stream down her face, and when she looked at Dominic, she saw he was crying too. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles, and his voice was thick with emotion when he spoke. A daughter, he whispered. We're having a daughter. Yes. She'll be beautiful, smart, strong, just like her mother, and brave, protective, willing to do anything for the people she loves, just like her father. Dominic leaned down and kissed her, and Elena tasted salt and hope and the terrifying joy of building something new from the wreckage of what they'd been. That night, as they lay in bed, Dominic's hand resting on her growing stomach, he spoke into the darkness. I need to tell you something. About my first family. Elena turned to face him, giving him her full attention. Her name was Sophia, my daughter. She was 3 when she died. His voice was rough but steady. She had dark hair like her mother, laughed at everything, loved the sea. I used to bring her down to the beach and let her chase the waves. What was her mother's name? Gabriella. We were young when we married. Too young, maybe. But we loved each other. Built a life together. I wasn't as deep into this world then. Had my hands in some questionable business, but I thought I could protect them. Keep them separate from the worst of it. What happened? I made an enemy. A man named Victor Kozlov, father to the brothers you met in Naples. I refused to partner with him on a weapons deal. Said I wanted to go legitimate, get out of that particular business. He paused. 2 weeks later, my house burned down. Gabriella and Sophia were inside. Elena's heart clenched. Oh, Dominic. Oh, the fire was ruled accidental, gas leak. But I knew better. I spent the next 15 years building an empire for one reason, to have enough power that no one could ever take from me again. To become so dangerous that even thinking about touching something I cared about would be suicide. Is that why you went after the Kozlov brothers so hard? Because of their father? Partly, but also because when they came for you, they proved that power alone wasn't enough, that there would always be someone willing to take that risk if the reward seemed worth it. He looked at her. I can't keep you safe just by being feared. I have to actually change the world we're bringing our daughter into. Elena took his hand, lacing their fingers together. So we change it, together. Not overnight, but gradually. We make it better. You really believe that's possible? I believe you're possible, and you were the last thing I expected. She smiled. So yes, I believe we can do this. Dominic pulled her close, and they lay together in the darkness, feeling the flutter of new life between them, and dared to hope for something neither had thought they deserved. A future built not on violence or fear, but on the choice to try, to be better, to love despite the risk. And in the quiet of that fortress by the sea, with the waves singing their eternal song below, two broken people began to believe they might actually succeed. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it happened nonetheless, woven into the fabric of daily life at the fortress as winter gave way to spring and Elena's pregnancy progressed into its final months. Dominic kept his promise about legitimizing his business, though Elena quickly learned that extracting oneself from the underworld was far more complicated than entering it. There were debts to settle, alliances to dissolve carefully, territories to hand over without appearing weak. Every decision required careful negotiation, every step away from violence a calculated risk. But he did it methodically, relentlessly, driven by the need to give his daughter a legacy that wouldn't destroy her. Elena watched him work from the library, where she'd taken to spending her afternoons reading and preparing for motherhood in equal measure. Sometimes Andreas would join her, updating her on Dominic's progress, treating her less like the boss's wife and more like a partner who deserved to know what was happening. He's selling off the shipping operations this week, Andreas told her one afternoon in late March. Clean sale to a transportation company out of Germany. Completely legitimate. How much has he divested so far? About 40% of the questionable holdings. The rest will take another year, maybe two, but he's committed. Andreas smiled slightly. I've never seen him like this, focused on building rather than protecting. It's remarkable. He's scared, Elena said softly. Terrified, actually. Of failing again. Of not being worthy. And you? Are you scared? Elena placed a hand on her swollen belly, feeling the baby kick in response. Every day. But I'm also hopeful. And I think hope is stronger than fear. At least I want it to be. Andreas nodded thoughtfully. For what it's worth, I think you're exactly what he needed. What all of us needed, actually. A reminder that there's more to life than survival. That evening, Elena found Dominic on the balcony of their bedroom, staring out at the sea as the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples. He looked tired, the weight of transformation evident in the tension of his shoulders. She moved to stand beside him, and without a word he wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. Hard day? She asked. Long day, but productive. He pressed a kiss to her temple. I finalized the sale of 3 properties that were being used for less than legal purposes. They're clean now, someone else's problem. That's progress. It is, but it's also exhausting. Every meeting is a negotiation, every former associate a potential threat if they feel betrayed. He sighed. I knew this would be difficult. I just didn't realize how much of my identity was wrapped up in being that person, the one everyone feared. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out who I am without that. What's left when you strip away the violence and the power and the reputation? Elena turned in his arms to face him fully. What's left is the man who reads Dante in the margins, who remembers the names of his guards' children, who stands on the rocks at night searching for something he thought he'd lost forever. She placed his hand on her belly. What's left is the father our daughter deserves, and the man I chose to love. Dominic's eyes were bright with emotion. How do you always know exactly what to say? I read a lot, remember? He laughed, the sound warm and genuine, and pulled her close again. They stood like that as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of hope. The nursery was completed in early April, just as Elena entered her 8th month. She'd worked with Lucia to design it. Soft colors, natural light, a view of the garden rather than the sea. They deliberately avoided anything too ornate or expensive, wanting it to feel like a sanctuary rather than a showpiece. When Dominic saw it for the first time, he stopped in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Well?" Elena asked nervously. "What do you think?" He walked in slowly, taking in every detail. The crib positioned near the window, the rocking chair in the corner, the books already lining the small shelf. His hand traced the edge of the crib, and when he spoke, his voice was thick. "It's perfect. Absolutely perfect." "You're sure? We can change anything you want." He turned to her, and she saw tears on his face. "When Sophia died, I locked away every piece of her, every toy, every article of clothing, every photograph. Buried it all because I couldn't bear to look at it. Couldn't bear to remember." He gestured to the nursery. "But this is different. This is hope instead of grief. Future instead of past." Elena crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "You're allowed to remember her, you know, to talk about her, to love her memory while still loving our daughter. I don't want our daughter to grow up in Sophia's shadow. Don't want her to feel like she's replacing someone. She's not replacing anyone. She's her own person, but Sophia is part of your story, part of what made you the man you are. And our daughter deserves to know that story, including the painful parts." Dominic pulled her close, careful of her belly, and held her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored. "How did I get so lucky to find you after everything? I think we found each other, and maybe luck had nothing to do with it. Maybe we were just two broken people who needed to collide to become whole." They stood together in the empty nursery, the afternoon light streaming through the windows, and for the first time in 15 years, Dominic Varelli allowed himself to fully believe in the possibility of a happy ending. The contractions started on a warm evening in mid-May, 3 weeks before Elena's due date. She'd been reading in the library when the first pain hit, sharp and unmistakable. She set down her book carefully, breathing through it, waiting to see if it was false labor or the real thing. 10 minutes later, another contraction, stronger this time. Elena found Dominic in his study reviewing contracts with Andreas. Both men looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "I think it's time," she said calmly. Dominic was on his feet instantly. "Are you sure? How far apart are the contractions?" "About 10 minutes. And yes, I'm sure." The fortress erupted into controlled chaos. Dr. Rossi was called immediately, arriving within 40 minutes with a full medical team. The bedroom had been prepared weeks ago, converted into a makeshift delivery room with everything they might need. Elena labored through the evening and into the night, Dominic never leaving her side. He held her hand through the contractions, wiped her forehead with cool cloths, whispered encouragement when the pain became overwhelming. "I can't do this," Elena gasped during a particularly brutal contraction in the early hours of morning. "Yes, you can," Dominic said firmly. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. You survived being sold at an auction. You survived me. You can survive this." "That's not helpful right now." "Then what can I do? Tell me what you need. Just stay. Don't leave." His grip on her hand tightened. "I'm not going anywhere. I promise." Dr. Rossi checked her progress, her expression pleased. "You're fully dilated. It's time to push." The next hour was a blur of pain and effort, and Dominic's voice in her ear, steady and sure, counting through the pushes, telling her she was doing perfectly, that she was almost there. And then, finally, miraculously, a cry split the air. "It's a girl!" Dr. Rossi announced, her voice warm with joy. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Elena collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and elated, as the doctor placed a tiny, squalling bundle on her chest. She looked down at her daughter, red-faced and furious and absolutely perfect, and felt her entire world reorganize itself around this small, fierce life. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Dominic stood beside the bed, staring at his daughter with an expression of such raw wonder that Elena felt tears stream down her face. His hand reached out tentatively, as if afraid he might break something precious, and gently touched the baby's tiny fist. Immediately, the baby's fingers wrapped around his, holding on with surprising strength, and Dominic broke. He sank to his knees beside the bed, his forehead pressed against Elena's shoulder, and wept. Not quietly, not with restraint, but with the kind of soul-deep grief and joy that could only come from someone who'd lost everything and been given a second chance. "She's here," he choked out. "She's real. She's ours." "Yes," Elena said, her own tears falling freely. "She's ours." Dr. Rossi finished her work quietly, giving them space, and when she finally approached to take the baby for measurements and cleaning, Dominic looked up with panic in his eyes. "It's all right," the doctor reassured him gently. "I just need to check her over properly. You'll have her back in 5 minutes." Those 5 minutes felt like an eternity. Dominic paced the room while Elena watched from the bed, both of them unable to take their eyes off the small bundle being weighed and examined. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Rossi announced. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, healthy lungs, good reflexes, 10 fingers and 10 toes. Congratulations. She brought the baby back, now wrapped in a soft blanket, and placed her in Dominic's arms. He held her like she was made of glass, his hand steady despite his fear, and looked down at his daughter with such love that Elena felt her heart might burst. "What should we name her?" he asked softly. They'd discussed names for months, but never settled on anything, both of them superstitious about choosing before the baby arrived safely. Elena watched him hold their daughter, saw the way he couldn't stop staring at her tiny face, and suddenly she knew. "Isabella," she said. "It means devoted to the divine. And she is, isn't she? A miracle we didn't dare hope for." Dominic looked up, his eyes bright. "Isabella," he repeated, testing the name. "Isabella Varelli." He smiled through his tears. "It's perfect. She's perfect." He brought the baby to the bed, settling beside Elena so they could both hold her, and together they marveled at the small miracle they'd created. "I never thought I'd have this again," Dominic whispered. "Never thought I deserved it." "Maybe we don't deserve it," Elena said. "Maybe grace isn't about deserving. Maybe it's just about being willing to accept it when it comes." Dominic kissed her forehead, then Isabella's. "Then I accept. All of it. Every beautiful, terrifying moment." The first weeks with Isabella were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Elena learned to function on minimal sleep, to read the different cries that meant hunger or discomfort or just the need to be held. And Dominic surprised them both by being a natural father. He took to nighttime feedings with dedication, walking the halls with Isabella when she was fussy, singing to her in Italian, soft lullabies that Elena suspected he remembered from his own childhood. He was patient and gentle and completely devoted. The feared crime lord transformed into someone who would do anything for a 7-pound bundle of need. "You're good at this," Elena told him one night as she watched him change Isabella's diaper with practiced efficiency. "I'm terrified every second that I'll do something wrong." "That's what makes you good at it. You care enough to be careful." He finished dressing Isabella in soft pajamas and lifted her into his arms, swaying gently. "I keep thinking about Sophia, about everything I missed with her because I was too busy building an empire, all the moments I can't get back. But you're here for these moments, every single one." "I am, and I will be." He looked at Elena over their daughter's head. "I meant what I said about changing, about being worthy of this. I'm not going back to who I was." "I know you won't." "How can you be so sure?" Elena smiled. "Because I've seen you choose love over power, redemption over revenge, hope over fear. And those aren't the choices of a man who's going to give up and go back." A month after Isabella's birth, Dominic made a decision that surprised everyone, including Elena. He gathered his remaining associates in the fortress's main hall, men who'd served him for years, who'd followed him through violence and chaos and uncertain transformation. Elena watched from the upper gallery, holding Isabella, as Dominic addressed them. "I've asked you here because you deserve honesty," he said, his voice carrying through the space. "Over the past year, I've been systematically dismantling everything we built together. The shipping operations, the protection networks, the business deals that existed in legal gray areas. I've sold them off or dissolved them." There was murmuring among the men, but no one interrupted. "I'm not abandoning you," Dominic continued. "Every man here will receive full severance, references, connections to legitimate employment if they want it. But I'm done with that life. I'm walking away completely." "Why?" one of the older guards asked. "You built the strongest organization in Southern Europe. Why throw it away now?" Dominic's gaze moved to the gallery, to where Elena stood with their daughter, and his expression softened. Because I finally have something worth living for instead of just surviving, and I refuse to risk losing it by staying in a world where violence is inevitable. He looked back at his men. I'm not going to ask any of you to follow me into this new life. Some of you have been with me for over a decade. You're soldiers, not civilians, and there's no shame in that. Andreas stepped forward. And if we want to stay, to help you build whatever comes next, then you're welcome. But understand it won't be what you're used to. I'm investing in legitimate businesses now. Real estate development, renewable energy, technology ventures. It's slower, less exciting, significantly more legal. Andreas smiled. Sounds boring as hell. It is. Count me in. One by one, others stepped forward. Not all of them. Some chose to take the severance and leave, finding employment with other organizations or retiring entirely. But enough stayed that Dominic had the core of something new, something better. That evening, after Isabella was asleep and the fortress had settled into quiet, Elena found Dominic in the library, staring at the shelves of books they'd discussed over so many nights. You really did it, she said. You actually walked away. I did. And it's terrifying. But you don't regret it? He pulled her into his arms, careful not to wake the baby monitor on the table. How could I regret choosing you? Choosing her? Choosing the possibility of actually being happy? Some people would say you're giving up too much power. Those people don't understand what real power is. Power isn't making people fear you. It's having someone choose you, freely, without coercion or obligation. It's holding your daughter and knowing she'll grow up safe because you made the hard choices. He pressed a kiss to Elena's temple. You gave me that, the chance to choose something better. We gave each other that chance. Neither of us could have done it alone. They stood together in the library, surrounded by books about redemption and transformation, and understood that they were living proof those concepts weren't just literary devices. They were possibilities. Real ones, for anyone brave enough to choose them. 6 months later, as autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, the fortress by the sea had transformed entirely. The guards were fewer, more focused on security than intimidation. The meetings held in Dominic's study were with architects and environmental consultants rather than criminals and enforcers. The gardens had been expanded, playing areas added for when Isabella was old enough to explore. And in the nursery, a 6-month-old Isabella was discovering her voice, babbling and laughing at everything, especially when her father made silly faces to entertain her. Elena watched from the doorway, her heart full, as Dominic played with their daughter. He was stretched out on the floor, letting Isabella grab his fingers and pull herself up, encouraging her early attempts at movement. She's going to walk early, he predicted. Look at how strong she is already. That's your genetics, stubborn and determined. I prefer to think of it as persistent and goal-oriented. Elena laughed, entering the room and settling on the floor beside them. Isabella immediately reached for her, and Elena gathered her daughter close, breathing in that sweet baby scent that never got old. Can you believe it's been 6 months? She asked. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like she's always been here. Dominic reached over to stroke Isabella's dark hair. I can't remember what life was like before her, before you. Quieter, I imagine. Emptier. He met her eyes. I was surviving before, just going through the motions. But this is living. Even with the 3 a.m. feedings and the endless diaper changes. Especially with those, because they mean she's here. She's ours. We get to do this. Isabella chose that moment to grab Dominic's nose and giggled delightedly when he pretended to be mortally wounded. Both parents laughed, and in that moment, Elena understood that this was what redemption looked like. Not a single grand gesture or dramatic transformation, but daily choices. Small moments of joy. The decision to be present, to be better, to love despite the risk. That evening, after Isabella was asleep, Dominic and Elena walked down to the beach. It had become their ritual over the past months, stealing moments alone after their daughter went to bed, reconnecting as partners while learning to navigate parenthood. They walked hand in hand along the shore, the autumn air crisp but not yet cold, the sea reflecting the stars above. I was thinking, Dominic said, about the future, about what we want Isabella to know when she's older, about us, about how we met. Yes. Do we tell her the truth? That I bought you at an auction? That you were essentially a prisoner here for months? Elena had wondered about this herself. How did you explain such an origin story to a child? I think we tell her an age-appropriate version. When she's young, we say we met during a difficult time and fell in love despite complicated circumstances. When she's older, a teenager maybe, we tell her more. The whole truth. She looked up at him. Because our story isn't just about how we started. It's about what we chose to become. You don't think she'll hate me for what I did? I think she'll understand that people are complicated, that transformation is possible, that love can grow in the most unexpected places. Elena squeezed his hand. And I think she'll be proud that her father chose to change, that he became better for her. Dominic stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The moonlight caught his features, and Elena was struck again by how much softer he'd become. The hard edges worn smooth by love and fatherhood. I need you to know something, he said, in case I've never said it clearly enough. What? You saved my life, not metaphorically. Actually, I was dead inside, just walking around pretending to be alive. And you came into my world and refused to let me stay that way. You challenged me, frustrated me, made me want to be worthy of you, and in doing that, you gave me my life back. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. You gave me my life too. My agency. My choice. You showed me I was stronger than I knew. We saved each other then. I think we did. He pulled her close, and they stood together on the beach where he'd once stood alone, searching for something lost. But he'd found it. Found it in the most unexpected person, in the most impossible circumstances. Found it in a girl who'd been sold at auction and chose to see the man beneath the monster. Found it in love that transformed everything it touched. A cry from the fortress. Isabella, waking from a bad dream. Both parents turned immediately, their instincts synchronized. I'll go, Dominic said. We'll both go. They walked back up the path together, toward the fortress that was no longer a prison but a home, toward the daughter who would never know the violence that had defined her father's past, toward a future they were building one choice at a time. And as Dominic lifted Isabella from her crib, soothing her tears with gentle words and rocking her until she settled back to sleep, Elena watched and understood that this was the happy ending she'd never dared hope for. Not perfect, not simple, but real. A life built not on ownership or obligation, but on choice. The choice to love, the choice to change, the choice to believe that redemption wasn't just a literary concept, but a daily practice. Dominic looked up from Isabella's sleeping form and caught Elena watching him. He smiled, and in that smile was everything they'd survived, everything they'd become, everything they'd chosen together. Thank you, he mouthed silently. Elena crossed to them, wrapping her arms around both her husband and her daughter, and whispered back, For what? For staying. For choosing this. For making me believe in second chances. She pressed a kiss to his cheek, then to Isabella's forehead. Thank you for being worth choosing. They stood together in the nursery, the three of them, a family built from broken pieces and impossible circumstances. Outside, the sea sang its eternal song. Inside, a child slept peacefully, unaware of the darkness her parents had survived to bring her into light. And in that moment, Elena Rossi Varelli understood that every choice that had led her here, even the ones made for her, even the terrible ones, had been worth it. Because they'd led to this, to love, to family, to hope, to a future where the girl who'd been sold at auction now stood as an equal partner to the man who'd bought her, where the monster had transformed into a father, where fear had given way to something stronger. Not perfect love, not fairy tale love, but real love. Hard-won and fiercely protected and absolutely worth fighting for. Elena had once believed that literature could save a person, that between the pages of great books existed sanctuary from the world's cruelty. But she'd been wrong. It wasn't literature that saved you. It was love. The kind that saw your worst parts and chose you anyway. The kind that transformed not through magic but through daily decisions to be better, do better, choose better. The kind she and Dominic had built together, one impossible choice at a time. And as Isabella sighed in her sleep, content and safe and loved beyond measure, Elena knew their story had found its ending. Not in escape or revenge or any of the dramatic conclusions she might have written in her thesis. but in the quiet triumph of two people who'd survived their own darkness and emerged into light. Together, always together. And that was more than enough.